Episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name's Brian Searl with Insider Perks and Modern Campground. Super excited to be here. It's our second episode of the year with this group of people, although we didn't have Zach for the first week and we didn't have our new intro. So what do you think about that, Kevin? You like that? Is that better?
That made me want to go camping. I loved it.
All right. Can you please wait an hour though? We'd like to.
Yeah, I can. I'll work on packing while we're doing this, and then I'll be ready to go.
That works. That works for me. So thanks, guys, for being here. I appreciate it. We got a couple people who are out sick this week. The flu seems to be going around, so we're missing Scott Foos, and Joe had something come up, and Devon was one of our special guests. He had to cancel because he was sick, and then Casey is from CampSpot is somewhere in Peru or something on some kind of midlife crisis, or I don't know what's happening with him, but he couldn't make it here either. So, but we're going to have a good conversation here. So we have Garrett, who's the owner of Glamping. Garrett, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your property, and then we'll have Zach and Kevin do the same?
Yep. Happy to be here. I own a four structure site near Houston, Texas, called Glamping. We've been open for about 2.5 years, and it's been amazing. And it's been definitely one of the biggest adventures of my life, in the positive, and just learning a lot about real estate.
Awesome. I'm excited to dive into that with you and learn more about your property. Kevin, Casey and Campgrounds.
Yeah, we're a group of, I guess you'd call us an investment firm. Started as operators with one park, and we've grown to, we're closing on our 9th property, all KOA franchises, close on number 9 here in a couple of weeks, spread out over 7 states. And, we've been doing this for about 7 years. And the last 2 or 3 years have been really focused on building out our team and trying to scale the business.
Awesome. Excited to have you here as a recurring guest, Kevin, as always. And Zach, first time we've seen you in a couple months. How was your Christmas?
Holidays are good. We actually took the whole family down to Puerto Rico for a week and got to see my brother-in-law, sister-in-law down there. I mean, tons of stuff in the works and things moving. And my big announcement that I've been working on for a couple months is we are formally branching the outdoor hospitality studio off and away from my soon-to-be former employer, Clockwork, and we're gonna build out the studio, kind of bringing on a new partnership with an engineering firm to be able to do not only the architecture and the design, but also landscape architecture, also civil engineering, and really have the resources and the people to build out a full dedicated team to do resort and hospitality design and development. So it's been a lot and a lot of back and forth over the last couple of months to get some of those things in place. But we're officially launching the new venture in the beginning of March.
That's awesome. Well, talk to us a little bit about it. Because that's obviously relevant news, right? I mean, we all have heard of Clockwork for a number of years. We've crossed paths with you at the shows.
Sure.
I mean, I have a light understanding of what you did there, although architecture is way above my pay grade. But generally speaking, what do you want to accomplish with the new company?
So the firm that we're partnering with is called LJA. They're predominantly a civil engineering firm, but they've done resort development, they've done RV parks, they've been in this space in this world for a number of years, and they kept seeing a need to add architects. They said, a lot of these developments, we know the engineering side of it, but they've worked with several architects around the country to varying degrees of success and expertise. And they said, we see an opportunity here to move this in-house and open an architectural division. And we've done a couple projects with them jointly over the last year, got to know the team. The main guy, Shannon Gordon, who's leading the Kansas City office, is actually somebody that I've known for 15 years. He and I have worked together at 3 different firms. And I had approached him kind of at the tail end of last year and said, hey, I'm thinking about, branching this off independent of Clockwork and just launching my own studio. And he said, well, what if you could do that, but with the backing of a, multi-million-dollar engineering firm helping you do it? And I said, well, that certainly sounds easier than taking all the risk on my own. And so we've kind of gone back and forth. They had to make the decision first that they wanted to actually open an architectural division. Um, and so that was sort of in the works for several months. But we've squared everything away, and what it's going to be is basically they've opened a new office in Kansas City just for us, for Shannon and I. Shannon is a licensed landscape architect with extensive resort and hospitality development experience over the last 25 to 30 years. Um, I've been an architect for 15 years, so he was working professionally while I was still going to school, and they've got a team already started, 5 different people, varying mix of backgrounds and perspectives, but everybody's dedicated to resort and hospitality. Um, and then I'm coming over from Clockwork. Potentially some of my team that's there will be coming to join me as well. We're still working out details on some of those things, making offers. Um, but essentially, it's taking kind of the success that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years and really putting us in a position to really grow this business, to launch, to have a more complete, comprehensive team of people, and really a dedicated vision to investing and partnering with people in the outdoor hospitality space to build and develop incredible resorts.
The one thing I think it's important for us to talk about here is like there's tons of campgrounders who are watching this show. I think there's probably very few who have envisioned like why I would need an architect at my campground, for example, right? So just briefly talk us through that because I think I was under the impression before meeting you, at least, that just the cabins. This is how it works, right, Kevin? The cabins just come in on wheels, and you just like back them up, and you're like, "That looks good," and then the guests come. Do you? So
Yeah.
explain to us why you need an architect.
Well, I would say the easy answer is a lot of what I do in this space doesn't have anything to do with architecture. Um, the longer answer is, good design is applicable everywhere. Um, and a lot of what we do with the clients that we've worked with, it's not really just construction drawings and plans, but it's all design. So having a comprehensive, well thought out site plan, um, having a phased plan, as most of these end up being, that you sort of have step by step, not just for what you're going to do year one, but year 3, year 5, year 7, year 10, that you've got a plan in place. Um, and then I would say most importantly is on the entitlement side for anybody who's buying an existing campground and wants to flip it, reposition it, somebody who's trying to build a new campground from the ground up, getting through that planning, zoning, permitting piece, you need an architect or an engineer to help you do that. And so that's been a big part of my job over the years, has been um, helping folks navigate that entitlement process. And in order to do that, you have to submit drawings and documents. They want to see a site plan. They want to see what your units are going to look like. What is your base camp structure, your office, your check-in, your staff housing? You need floor plans, you need elevations, you need drawings, renderings. And so that's what we do.
Yeah, Brian, we've experienced both sides of that. To your point earlier, we're only buying existing campgrounds. We're not doing any true ground up development.
But you do like rip apart stores. I've seen photos of you three. I can't remember what campground that was from, but
that was probably for any of them.
okay. I just remember seeing the 3 people with sledgehammers and they were busting up stuff. So
that was probably Wisconsin Dells, but we've done that in many locations. No, I mean, like when we go in, we buy a park. If it's already up and running, it has all the infrastructure, and we're taking the RV site and turning it into a cabin, and we're using a park model or deluxe cabin. Then yeah, we order it, gets dropped off, we block it, hook up the utilities, put some skirting on it, and it's ready to go. But that's a lot different than what Zach's talking about, because we've also gone through the process of trying to do expansions and buying land adjacent to our parks. And you really do have to go through all of the hoops. So it just depends on really the scope of what you're doing. And, having those those multi-year, multi-phased plans like Zach was just talking about, the better you get that up front, the easier it is to get through all of the approvals and permitting. And we've tried, honestly, not to skirt the rules, but we've tried to shortcut in some ways, and it just takes longer. And so, like for bigger projects, we're learning that it's just a lot more efficient and timely to use the right people, get it done the right way, because it really doesn't matter which jurisdiction you're in. They're going to require that level of detail.
What does that look
And
like?
for buyers too, we've worked with a lot of clients that are buying existing assets. Um, and one of the things that we do is sort of an evaluation of that property, where we'll come out and spend a day or two walking around, and we're looking for code issues. We're looking for, what are the immediate things that need to be done? What are potential health safety risks to your guests and to the public? What needs to be addressed, now? What are things that we feel are important and should be addressed in the next 6 to 12 months? And then working with that owner, what do you see? What was your vision here, for that adjacent property that you might want to expand on, or buy at some point in the future? We'll sit down and do a test fit and say, hey, if you bought that, we think you can get 20 glamping units over there or 35 RV pads over there. And then they can run the math and work their numbers and say, well, at this purchase price, that doesn't really make sense for us right now. Or if we can get that many on it, then maybe what they're asking makes sense and it would have value. We look at a lot of accessibility issues. There's certain requirements, and then there's also just kind of general good practices. And I like to tell people often when they say, well, do I have to do that? Is that required? I'll say, well, no, it's not required, but it won't stop you from getting sued. So evaluating existing properties, both for potential future development, as well as just what is the current state, and what, if any, issues, are we looking at? That's also a big part of what we do.
Kevin, I'm curious. You mentioned acquiring campgrounds versus building, at least so far, right? Nobody knows where KCN will go in the future. As big as you want it, hopefully. But when you're coming in and you're acquiring a property for the first time, or maybe it's before that, before you close, right? Like you mentioned, your ninth one is coming up, but what is that process because we're really talking about the foundations of user experience here, right? Like guest experience. Eventually, they're not experiencing it quite at that point yet, but we're thinking of the accessibility. We're thinking of the design and the flow and the landscaping and all the stuff, right? In addition to the permitting that doesn't really impact them, but will obviously eventually if you are able to open. But how does that process go in KCN's mind when you're looking at a park for either evaluation or you come in after you've closed? Like how do you decide to rip up the store or not rip up the store? Those kinds of things.
So the process we go through when we look at it, there's the initial kind of high level. Does the market make sense? Is there a reason for people to be there? We look at the history, and that's the real reason why we focus on only buying existing parks, even though a lot of them are old and need a lot of work. The infrastructure is outdated. There's deferred maintenance, but we can look at how has this park performed over time, and is there a loyal customer base, and do we know that people are going to come, versus when you're developing something from scratch, you don't have that data to base it on, right? You can go through the process of doing feasibility studies and all of that and understand traffic patterns, and you can get comfortable with that, but it's a little bit different than when you can look at and say, hey, we had 15,000 camper nights last year and 12,000 the year before. This is what our reservations look like as of right now for the future. So that's kind of been our focus at the high level. Let's check those boxes. And then when we get into it, we look at, we are all active outdoors adventure campers within our company. And so we look at it from the lens of what would we want? If I go into a property, and I'm looking at it to buy, is it somewhere that I would want to stay? Would I want to bring my family back? What do I like about it? What do I not? Been to enough campgrounds and done enough camping in my life that I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what works and what doesn't. But then we also go back and we'll look at what guests have been saying about the park as well, right? There's a lot of information you can pull from guest reviews and look for trends. If you have people complaining about accessibility issues, then you know that that's something that needs to be addressed. If they're complaining about, Wi-Fi not working or being really spotty, then you know that that's something you need to look into. So we evaluate all of that, and then we apply a lens of what's working well, and is there enough demand that we can take that to the next level, right? And our cabins or glamping units performing really well. Is there an opportunity to add more of those? Is it RV sites that are performing well? And that would be the focus of what we try and build out in the future. And then we'll even dig in a little bit more. And it's not just, you can't just look at RV. You need to look at, are they 50 amps? Are they 30 amps? Are they full hookup? Are they back ends? Are they pull through? What's the length, right? You could have, really well performing sites because they are big enough to fit a nice long motorhome that's towing a vehicle. And then you could have an RV site right next to it that has all the same amenities, but it's just too short, so it doesn't perform. And so that's kind of how we go through our evaluation of what's the strategy for the park. Where's the low hanging fruit that we can attack right away, and where's the real meaty value add that we can do over time.
So 2-part question, and then I want to get to Garrett. First part, I think, is if I'm a park owner watching this show right now, hearing what you're saying, how do I identify what my weaknesses are? Not to buy a property, but I already have my property. I've owned it 6 months or 2 years or 10 years or 15 years. Where do I begin that process to figure out what guests, like obviously you can read reviews and things, but a little bit more deeper than that, right? How do I figure out what I can improve? And then once I figure out what I can improve from a guest experience standpoint, or all the things you just talked about, how do I prioritize?
Yeah, the prioritization, I think, is the hard part. It's really not that hard to identify where you can get better, right? You've got data, you've got numbers, you can look at what sites are performing well, you can look at seasonality, you can look at a lot of different things in your numbers and your registration history. You can also look at your competition, right? Like go and drive through, or go visit the other parks in your area and look, if you're slow on a busy weekend, are the other parks in town, are they busier than you are? And try and see what's different about what they're doing. Is it their location? Is it their, do they have someone greeting you when you pull in? Do they have a better set of amenities, right? And so you have to do that kind of comp comparison. Is it rates? Is it, any number of things? And then once you've built that list out, I think for us, it comes down to momentum. There's going to be some things that are you need to do, you need to invest in, and they may take some time. So we'll look at, is there anything we can do today that's going to have an impact on tomorrow, and try and get the ball rolling while we work on some of those longer term projects. So like if we know that the feedback is we just need more of this particular site type, or we need to have just a better Wi-Fi system, that might take several months or longer. So we'll work on that in the background, but what can we do today to make sure that our guests that are with us today are going to want to come back tomorrow?
Makes sense. I'm glad I don't own an RV park. I'm not brave enough to do all that stuff. Sit behind my little mic here and talk.
Garrett, well, you can always invest with us, Brian, and we'll do that for you. You can just
that requires me to have money first, Kevin. I don't make any money. Well, like these 2 plants back here were basically a month's salary for me.
Yeah, well, figure out all this AI stuff you're working on, and then let's talk.
I'm trying. I'm working on it. Garrett, Cameron Ranch Glamping. So you heard what we're kind of talking about here with guest experience, and obviously, all the way from the permitting process to, guest experience down to the things that Kevin mentioned. How did that thought process go for you? Did you develop or did you buy Cameron Ranch? Or
I developed it, and I can definitely attest to how impactful a good architect is, and to have in your plans going forward, and how smart it is to have the vision for where you want to take the site in a few years, and not just, especially I try to be more, I don't want my sites to be, I try to keep them smaller and have more room. And so I have maybe 4 or 5 that I develop and then try to be more high end. And working with an architect helped me get the exact site plan that I needed to be a commercially permitted facility in an area that had never heard of glamping. I brought this to the permitting department, and you would have thought I was asking them if we could, build a rocket ship or something. They were more than welcome to hear my ideas, and I had a great architect that was local. He helped me develop a site plan. He helped me get my geodome commercially permitted, which a lot of people told me I was never going to have an opportunity to do that. But when you work with people that are very, very experienced in that field, they're going to be able to help you counteract what you don't know when you're getting into it. But I did develop it, and I did have a big vision going forward for how many sites I wanted on the property. It was just a house with 11 acres. I knew I wanted to end up with about 5 sites in the end and keep a high end feel to them. And now we've already had our 4th and 5th permitted, and we're starting the building processes on them, but I've been working with the same architect the whole time and developing, making sure there's enough ample space and road work, and, accessibility was a big thing. Even within my county, we had to plan for, an ADA unit as well too, because that was one thing that was a holding point within my county, is once you hit a certain amount of units, some areas are going, it's kind of a legal gray area, and I'm definitely not the person to talk about it, but they say once you get over 4 units that you're probably entering the space of, like, this is when you're going to need some type of accessibility unit like that. And working with an architect helped me plan all those things and kept my costs down, because I was able to plan ahead for tying in septics, tying in my water wells, the road work, all those things that go into it. So that helped build the guest experience before I even started working with somebody very reputable, and made my permitting process honestly easier than I ever expected. But I leaned on people that knew better than me.
I mean, I think the takeaway that I have here, just being, not deeply involved in the space from an architecture building standpoint to, actually owning properties, is that this what comes before and what comes during and what comes after is much more complex than I think people from the outside looking in realize. And certainly you can choose to make that more or less complex based on what you want to accomplish at your property, how good a service you want to provide, how good of amenities, landscaping, all those kinds of things, right? But I think it continues on past what we've talked about and I have it in Garrett's going to talk about this, personalizing guest experiences as well. Maybe he just heard that the first time in front of the show. You said that, Garrett. That's the first time I've heard it too. That you were going to talk about it. But do you do specific things with personalizing guest experiences? Because, like, I think, a lot of what we're talking about here is feasibility studies, is understanding what your guests want, is looking back at, in Kevin's case, the guests who have been there, have been coming there for years, what they think, what their behavior patterns are, why they come back, looking at our competitors and understanding what they have that we can either build or we can make better. That extends all the way to the guest experience too, is understanding deeply who your guest is. Like, we're doing a lot of this work with our clients this year. It's a big emphasis on us on creating like the ideal customer profiles through market research, doing, focus groups that are backed by both real data and by really smart thinking AIs that can pull different buyer personas by creating audience style guides. And some of that leads us to deeper comp analysis, deeper understanding of who our guests are, or who maybe some guests are that we aren't marketing to that we're missing. And so I think that leads to what I hope you're going to talk about, is personalizing guest experiences, but a little bit of just making sure that you're doing that to the specific guest type that you both want to attract and that you are attracting. Is that fair?
Yep. One of the main things I identified before I started building my first glamping site was what my target guest avatar was going to be. I visited different glamping sites all around the country, all throughout Texas. Some, they may have, 20 or 30 structures on a small piece of land, and they go after their specific demographic. I went to others that, may have had 4 or 5 structures sprawled out over, a myriad of acres, and each one had specific things that you could tell were catered to the guests they wanted to attract. And I realized that I needed to hone in on that before I developed my site. And personalizing this guest experience, one reason why I, staying in these sites, I learned quickly. I would go with my girlfriend, and we would see, like, we wanted to create a couples retreat, basically coming from Houston. We knew we were by a major feeder city that didn't have anything like it in the area. And we wanted to be able to build this type of guest avatar for them. We noticed quickly that, the more space you have in between some of these sites, the higher ADR you can get, average daily rate. And then the more space you have within them too, the more amenities you can pack in for that particular structure that you're building. I knew that private amenities were going to drive a much higher occupancy and average daily rate for what I wanted to do with my guest avatar. And so personalizing that experience for them, each unit has its own private hot tub. Each unit has its own private sauna. I knew that those type of things were going to be able to really draw the impact that I wanted to from, different couples, guests, and things. And as we've developed the site and had it going on further, I have a hospitality background. I went to school for hotel management. So I knew the one key that I always wanted to implement with when I started attracting guests was figuring out, what brings them to the site or what brings their interest to the site, and then how they heard about us. Because we knew that that was going to be able to really customize the experience for them going forward with how we can, add these little touches to make sure that their stay is word of mouth. Marketing is by far the best thing you can have from any of these type of sites, because obviously the spend is next to nothing. You're having paying guests give you the social currency you need on social media and these type of things like that to draw in. Usually your guests that have already stayed with you have like-minded friends and like-minded people in their circle that would want to do similar things. So we always would ask them on our first, messages to them is, are you celebrating anything? And how did you hear about us? Those are two things that I really tried to hone in on. And then we would make sure that we provided as top-notch of an experience as we could, but really play into some even simple things. Like if a guest is coming because they want to celebrate their anniversary, which is by far probably the biggest between birthdays and anniversaries, the biggest amount of guests that we have come out there. Something as simple as a happy birthday card or a happy anniversary card will go a long way for them to give that social currency going forward. I've had numerous guests get these cards and then they post it on their Instagram or they post it on their Facebook and like talk about the thoughtful little touches that you can put into each guest stay. And even a cool trick we've implemented recently to personalize it even more, talking about AI specifically, is we will get the guest name. We'll have some type of AI system, ChatGPT or something, to write a very simple song of 20 to 30 seconds in lyrics. And then there's apps out there for $5 a month that you can put these lyrics in, and it will make the quickest custom song that you can have for the guest. And this is something we send out, a week before they book. And it's very silly. It's nothing groundbreaking,
but they'll share it and they'll remember it and they'll
all the time. The amount of people that have shared this on their social media and tagged us in it, like, look at this cool feature that somebody sent us, we're going to stay. And then that just starts the snowball for the word of mouth bookings to start rolling in, which is, the holy grail of any marketing person, is getting that word of mouth out there and doing unique things like that, utilizing AI and really just trying to understand why the guest chose your property out of the myriad of options they have to do nowadays. They could go stay in a 5-star hotel somewhere. They could go stay at a campground. They could, there's so many things people can do nowadays too. So the people that have actually decided to book at your property and spend money with you showing them how much you care with little personalized things like that is the thing that goes above and beyond. And they're going to talk highly about you for weeks, months, years to come, about how pleasing of a time they had and how welcome and heard they felt going to your property. And that's all we really wanted to implement when we, we're starting this kind of venture, to really just hone in on that guest experience and provide something above and beyond.
I think we've got a lot that I want to dive into there in a few minutes, because that's something that obviously I'm passionate about with AI and just personalization too, from a marketing side of it. But I want to back up just briefly and talk to Kevin and Zach about, because Zach, you do branding too, don't you? Okay. So I'd love to just talk about that buyer persona piece with each of you. And specifically, like, maybe you can start, Zach, because you do like branding as a thing, right? But then Kevin, I'm curious because you kind of come with at least one built-in buyer persona, which is the KOA loyalist to your property.
Mhm.
But then how do you expand those and look at those from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a good point, right? When we look at our parks and anytime we're evaluating a new property, we'll look at what's the history of the guests and how many people are coming back multiple times. Are they coming back every year? Are they coming multiple times per year? And if we dig into the numbers, I mean, we've seen some parks where the KOA rewards members are 65 to 70% of overall guests and revenue that's being driven by that, right? So that's a big number. It's a big draw. And so we know who they are, we know why they're coming, and it helps us tailor to them. And then to try and build out more a bigger demographic of campers, people who haven't been to our parks before. It's a combination of a few things of just some basic blocking and tackling of how do we make our parks more visible, more visually appealing, right? So you're going through the SEO process, making sure we have good photography and videos on our websites, that we're marketing all the reasons why people would want to come there. So one of the things we've been doing the last couple of years is trying to figure out itineraries. So, to really make things simple for people. Okay, if you're going to come to this area, here's 3 days of all the places you can go and see and what to eat and what to do. And so they don't have to think about it. Right. So that's one thing we're doing. And then, we just brought on a new role in-house for a content creator with the goal of really building out organic social media presence to promote and try and get that, like Garrett was talking about, right? That word of mouth. And how do we, instead of just doing the basic paid ads and pay-per-click that we've been doing and people have been doing for so long, that can work well, but isn't really going to solve those problems, right?
And isn't cheap. Yeah.
It's not cheap. You can spend a lot. And the reality is like, to your question, how do we get people who are non-KOA campers to come? We need to reach the broadest audience possible. And there's a lot of people out there who are just looking for experiences, and they don't know about, they don't know that campgrounds like what we run, what they're really like. They're thinking state parks, they're thinking national parks. They don't realize that we have luxury sites and high-end amenities and, these types of experiences. And so the more we can do to show what it's like to actually stay at one of our properties, the more likely we'll be in attracting that new audience. And also like the shift in the camper demographic over the last few years, right? It's completely flipped to where now I think the latest stat that I saw is 50% of new campers are under the age of 35, right? So we're now trying to target a whole different type of avatar.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. And Zach, I want to get to you in a second. But that's fascinating to me what you just said about like getting people to understand what your campgrounds, we've already established I'm not brave enough to own one. What your campgrounds and RV parks and resorts and glamping places, whether they have cabin rentals or not, offer, because a lot of people don't understand this. The first time, and really, like, I've thought about this from a marketing aspect for years, but I've never really put myself in the position of doing that until I met Earl from Black Folks Camp 2, who's a really good man. And he has a message of like, there's a lot of underserved Black people who don't understand the outdoors, period, right? Like they've just never been exposed to it. And then I just started kind of going on a downward spiral. That's not the right word, right? But just a deeper research path into looking into that. And I'm realizing, like, Scott Barr and I were looking at Gen Z research of how to convince Gen Zs who stay in hotels normally or Airbnbs to come stay at campgrounds or cabin rentals. Why? What's the experience? What's the pitch there? And that's the same thing. They just have no idea that there are actually luxury experiences available at campgrounds, I don't think. Yeah. And so it's more than just Black folks. It's a lot of people who have not been exposed to this because, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there's been a lot less marketing to groups that are not full-time RVers who have been doing it for 20, 40 years. and some by age, perhaps that demographic is shrinking. And so now there's perhaps an impetus for us to do that a little bit more. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, I'll admit, before I bought my first campground, which happened to be a KOA, I'd never been to one before. I'd seen the signs, but didn't, like, if I'm being totally honest, I didn't know that it was a campground that was open to the public. I thought it was either private or like a scout camp or something. I really had no idea what it was. And so that was a little eye-opening for me. But I come from the background of, if I'm going camping, I'm going to throw everything in a backpack and go up in the mountains as far as the road can take me, and then I'll go, hike up the mountain. And so there are a lot of people that just aren't familiar with what it is. Like you said, that traditionally, especially within the KOA world, where it's really, heavily catering towards RVers and not just, campers, right? There's a difference there between,
yes,
your traditional tent camper and an RVer, right? And so it is making it possible for people to know what they can experience at a park like this, even if they don't have an RV, right? Like, how many people really understand how nice it is to stay at an outdoor resort in a cabin that is going to provide you with more sleeping than a hotel room. Your kids can be actually in a separate bedroom than what you're in. Plus you have outdoor space. Plus you can take your dogs. That's that. When people realize that, and the different types, you could still be in the same markets, go to the same places, but it's a whole different type of experience. And, it's not that I want to bag on hotels, because I stay in them a lot and, I can enjoy them. But if I had the option of a nice cabin in a campground or a, standard double queen hotel room, I'd much rather stay in the campground.
Well, that takes us back to what Zach's going to talk about here, right? Which is the buyer personas, is that there are definitely a lot of people like you, Kevin, who would do that. But there are also people who are like, no, I don't want to walk to my cabin when it's raining outside. How dare you make me do that, right? But there are people then that are other ways that you can convince them to stay, that, even though they have that, I don't want to call it a negative experience, but because I don't think it's negative either. I would stay the same place as you, Kevin. But there's that goes back to understanding that buyer persona, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and you don't have to capture the entire market, right? There's a whole river that's flowing by, and all you need is a ladle, and you got to find a spot by the river and just start scooping out, right? We're not trying to capture every traveler, but there's a lot of people that I think would really enjoy the experiences that we can offer. We just need to make sure that they know that it's an option.
All right, Zach, I'm shutting up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that, and I've actually got some questions for Garrett and Kevin both. Part of what we do when we start a project, before we put pen on paper or draw anything, is we start by doing a site visit. And Kevin kind of talked about that, like, before they buy a park, they want to check out that area. Designing for the guest experience, it's not just about picking a tent or a cabin or a covered wagon. It's really about telling a story, and it starts with an evaluation of not only the property that we want to build on, or the campground that they're buying, but it's what's in that area. So Kevin, when you talked about, like, we built these like 2-day excursions or 3-day excursions, like, well, here's the itinerary, here's what we recommend. That's phenomenal, and that's great. I think from a design perspective, a lot of that has implications too on what we decide to develop. We looked at a property last year. It was in South Carolina, and it was very near a kind of quaint little mountain town. We went downtown that night. We walked around. It's a healthy, vibrant downtown. There was looked like new businesses that had been built or opened, and I think I counted 14 different restaurants or bars or places to eat. And this is 5 minutes from our site. So, coming back to start that design phase, um, the client said, well, we need a store and we need a restaurant because we really want to cater to families and kids. So we want a full kitchen, a full blown restaurant. And I said, why? We've got 15 great mom and pop restaurants and bars and things 5 minutes down the road. Like, we don't need to make a big investment in F&B on this property because you have it. It's all around you. And by the way, that's their business and they're going to do it better than you do.
Yeah.
And so understanding what's there, prioritizing that. And then secondly is, part of what we go through is just kind of what you talked about. It's what Garrett talked about. Deciding like, who is my ideal guest? Who is my target guest? Building out a profile for them. You call it an avatar or whatever, but we've identified like these are our 2 or these are our 3 kind of main customer demographics that we're shooting for. And then figuring out if we're going to appeal to that person, what do they want? What's going to make their stay more comfortable? What's going to, draw that person, attract that person to come here? But also, what is in the area that we would consider as competition and what is not? And how can we differentiate ourselves? Because, again, if it's just about making money, it's providing an accommodation only and a good price point, it's a race to the bottom. What separates and differentiates outdoor hospitality is that we're delivering more than just a stay. It comes down to that whole guest experience, beginning to end. Have we told a story? Are they getting what they expected? Is our messaging consistent with what we see from that person on or that resort on Instagram and then on their Facebook page and then on their website and then in their email marketing and messaging that they get to us, in the text message that we get after we book our reservation, in the messages that we get, and then when we walk in that office or check in, or we walk into our unit for the first time, is all of that consistent? Because consistency with brand delivers trust, and the 2 things that you can't buy in the world of outdoor hospitality is trust and authenticity. You can't fake it, you can't buy it, you got to deliver it, and you got to deliver it consistent every single time. And so I think it's, when I think about guest experience, it needs to be interwoven into every single part of what you're doing. It's not just the design of your site or the interior design of your units. It's that consistent brand. And we've seen, especially over the last year or 2 years, I've seen examples where it's been done really, really well. And these are the places that they're printing money, and it's like it's not
Yeah.
it's not a difficult equation to figure out. Like there's no magic to this. They're doing the very basic stuff. They're just doing it really, really well. And they're building that trust. They're building relationships with their clients, and they're consistent across the board at doing it every single time. And so that's to kind of tie those 2 worlds together of what I do from a design and permitting and architecture perspective back to guest experience. There's no one big thing that is the answer to guest experience. It's every single little thing.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's an aggregation of little things done consistently. It's easier said than done, right? And
Yeah.
we'll all slip up from time to time, but if that's the focus of how do we just do one thing a little bit better today than we did yesterday and just keep moving forward with that mindset, then over time it'll compound for sure.
And
So
go ahead.
One of my questions for you, Kevin, was, you mentioned that you guys have 9 different sites now, and are in several different states. Because so much of what we just talked about is region specific, is site specific. I want you to talk about maybe some of the challenges that you've had in having vastly different states, different regions, different locations, and then maybe give us a little peek into whether that's like back of house or your internal process or a consistent thing that you go through, or if it's just been, no, we didn't, and we made a mistake here and we learned from it. We learned, we did something here that didn't work either, so we learned from it. And now, like, how has your process changed?
Well, we joke a lot internally that the only thing that is consistent in our business is change. Not all of our people like that, to be honest, right? Is the change is hard and uncomfortable, but
Most people don't. Yeah.
yeah,
Generally.
we've done this, enough times that we've learned that it's never cookie cutter. And when you're dealing with, like you said, different states, different counties, different jurisdictions, different, if I'll go out on a limb and say, egomaniacal building departments and things like that, right? Like you
That's
have
not
to,
going out on a limb.
yeah, just, I'm not going to say where in case, anyone's listening. I know Brian's really popular, so
I think being a sadist is a prerequisite to be a plans reviewer in most counties.
Yeah.
So checks this week. There's 4 people who are watching, guaranteed. So.
Yeah. Well, then at least it's not someone from every one of our parks. No, it's like Zach, we've made a lot of mistakes, and we have made assumptions where we thought that we'd be able to do things in a certain time frame or do it in a certain way. And some of that's based off of past experience. So one of the benefits of being a KOA franchise is they have a whole design department that supports franchisees, right? And so we can go to them and say, here's our park, here's these 5 acres, here's our occupancy data by site type, help us figure out what makes the most sense, right? A lot of the stuff that you're talking about that you can do for your clients. So we can come up with those plans, and they can do CAD drawings and do the electrical, amp draws and voltage drops calcs and a lot of things. And we've had experiences where that's all we've needed to take to the city or county. And we've had other instances where we've taken Google Maps screenshots and with an iPad and some colored pencils drawn, okay, here's the road and here's where the RV sites are going. And, here's where the water lines are going to be. And some people are okay with that. And then, we've had others where we feel like it's just cut and dry, and it takes 18 to 24 months to get approved because it's the building department, then it's the Department of Environment comes in, and then it's the state, and then it goes back to the city. Yeah. And, we're going through the same process multiple times, and can be really frustrating because we've already got the approvals, but someone else feels like they need to put their stamp on it. And then some people come in and say, we don't need engineered stamps. But then if you say the wrong thing and upset the wrong person, then they say, well, I have the authority to require you to get these plans stamped by an engineer. So get ready to write another $20,000 check for this. And so I don't know if I have a real answer to your question, Zach, other than every time we go through it, we learn something new and we try and improve our processes. And we just recognize that internally we it's not our skill set. We're not engineers, we're not architects. So last year we brought on someone in-house as a construction project manager who had a lot of experience with another operator going through that and doing large projects. And so I think it's important just to recognize where you have a gap and try and find someone, whether it's hiring them, whether it's finding the right contractor or vendor or partner. And so the hope is that every time we go through one of those projects, we get it a little bit better, and then update our process and our system so that when we do it again the next time, we get better again. But there's no,
can't solve the bureaucracy problem, right?
no, you can't. And there's no silver bullet for any of this.
Well, there is actually. Give Elon a few months, and maybe we can bring him into the cities for the campground permitting.
Well, let us know how that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a struggle, but at the end of the day, it's worth it because there's so much value you can add to these properties by going through it. So it's some people don't want to do it. We bought campgrounds from owners who have been overbooked and had so much demand and so limited inventory, but they've refused to do anything because it would require scaling up their operation, and that's not what they want to do. So that's a great opportunity for us.
Yeah.
And so it's not for everybody. And one of the things that the puzzle we've been trying to solve is how can we be the group that can do this effectively so we can deliver to our investors on the things that we believe are possible with these properties when we buy them.
Garrett, go ahead. Sorry, I keep cutting you off by accident.
Oh, no, I just think those are all very valid points, that it's every single city and planning department, everything is going to be totally different. Even when I was developing mine, I was picking between two counties nearby, and one was I talked to local contractors to get an idea of what their thoughts were, and unique builds and things. And I had a few great pieces of advice, like, hey, this county is going to make you, run for 2 years before you get a permit on something like this. This other county's a little more lax. You probably should look to them. And yeah, it was just kind of night and day. And they were neighboring counties, so there's never a one size fits all for it. But understanding these things, learning, enhancing your processes, and I personally started smaller so I could learn some of these things, and then for my next bigger projects, I'll have a little more experience under my belt to be prepared for these kind of things too, because you don't know what you don't know until you tackle some of these projects, because there's not an exact Bible to this for any type of structures that you're building like this.
Zach, did you say you had a question for Garrett earlier? I can't remember. We might have covered it.
Yeah. So Garrett, you mentioned, and it kind of curtails into just what you were talking about, where every jurisdiction is different, and that's part of the value of working with professionals. Um, you mentioned that you got one of your domes permitted for year-round use, and I've done that, and in some very difficult jurisdictions for some of our clients. Um, Talk a little bit more about that process. Like, was it just building code issues? Was it energy code? Was it HVAC? Like, maybe talk about some of the challenges and the changes. What you did different that allowed you to do that.
I think the main thing that I can like really give advice to people on is, especially for geodomes in particular or other structures, is buy from a reputable company that has architecture plans from them already. Like I bought mine from Pacific Domes. They
Hmm.
have architecture plans
Great company.
stamped.
Yeah.
They're more expensive than other ones, because you'll get ads all day for buying one off Alibaba or Temu or something, and it's very enticing to get one of those for $2,000. But one, they're just not the same quality, and two, you're not going to be able to probably get that permitted or get somebody to make plans for that to get it a commercial permit. Like, you could have I wanted full on-grid utilities. I wanted electric. I wanted a premium bathroom. I wanted septic, all these things. And the only way my county was going to allow that is having these enhanced architecture plans that were not cheap. I think they were
No.
$4,000. And I had to get the upgraded steel structure that was more wind and snow resistant, even though I'm in Houston, which is hilarious to say that about snow resistant. But I did not go cheap on that. And that made my life so much easier because I found a company that had these plans. My next one was a mirror house that's only 220 square feet, but I worked with a company that does these modular, had all the plans, had the electrical, had, plumbing, HVAC, all these things that are needed by the county. And it made my permitting just, I do consulting for glamping people all over the country that have tried to build things. And the horror stories I hear from them trying to get something permitted like this, and then they don't, work with a reputable company or something. It's almost next to impossible, especially as this is growing and everybody is really trying to develop different things like this. Pacific Domes made my life so much easier that the only thing I can attest to is just don't go cheap on that, and don't think you're going to be able to skirt that, because it is something that is your county. If they have any bit of pushback on it, it's going to be on those type of plans that you have, or your lack of plans, and then you have to pivot, and then you're talking a whole different type of operation that you may be developing that you weren't anticipating.
You're probably going to pay for it one way or another. It's either an upfront cost for a higher quality product with those plans.
Okay.
You're going to pay for it in your time if you go cheap and have to go back and forth, or you're going to pay for it in lost occupancy, poor guest satisfaction, right? Like, there's any number of outcomes. And it's not that I'm saying, and we definitely don't just like find the most expensive thing and do that, but you have to consider those things, right? Like, budget is important, and you've got to plan for it and you got to stick to it. But to the extent that you can get ahead of some of these things, and like I said before, get some momentum, that's worth a lot more than trying to save a few bucks, right? Stepping over dollars to save dimes, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're in
You
it
always
for
get what you
long-term
pay
business.
for.
Yeah.
And you get what you don't pay for too.
Yeah, it all comes down to the fact that you have to do the work. You have to do the legwork. Just like you're saying, it's not always the most expensive one. Like it could be, but like in a lot of cases, it's not.
Yeah.
But you have to look into what exactly you need and what that company's provided, and just like Garrett was talking about, talking to the different contractors in the different counties. Like it just requires work, which is, again, another reason why I'm sitting here in a studio, because my head hurts just with you guys. I can't even imagine what I would be like in front of a planning board. They'd kick me out in about 5 minutes. So.
You can take that same concept, Brian, and apply it towards how you're interacting with your guests, right? Like unfortunately, the mentality is as well, everything's about price. So if I give somebody a discount, or if they're upset and I give them a refund or something, that's going to solve all their problems. But it's not. Usually it's being willing to put in the effort to show up for them, to create a personal touch, like Garrett was talking about. And yeah, it's a little bit of an investment of time and effort and just headspace. But again, you get what you pay for, you get what you're willing to put into it. So, just offering the cheapest rates in town is not necessarily going to give you the best guest experience.
100%. Yeah. I don't think we ever got to the discussion I said I was going to have about personalized guest experiences. So maybe we'll have to tackle that next week. Maybe Garrett, we'll see if you can come back on here if you want to come back on here. Talk about some of the personalized guest experiences in a month or something, because that's really important to dive into. Like we did that years ago when ChatGPT 3.5 came out. I had like a form that was never public, but it was internal, that I built for actually Verde Ranch RV Resort, where you just put in your name inside a form or whatever, and then you hit submit, and it would trigger like a Zapier automation and would go through AI and write that. Like obviously they're way, way better now. And now, like you're talking about, you can use something like a Suno or I can't remember the name of the other music generators to actually put music to it, right? But doing those kinds of things, that's what excites me about the future, is the ability of technology to unlock better guest experiences. Because I think previously, a lot of the talk around technology has been, it's maybe makes you more efficient, but it isn't necessarily a good thing. Think a phone tree, right? Or something like that. It isn't necessarily better for the guest experience. But now I think for the first time ever, we can have both. We can have a better guest experience and cheaper operations. And that's amazing. So,
and I think the thing too, and I think Kevin alluded to this earlier, if you have a automation, a system, this takes me, like Garrett said, this takes 5 minutes and it runs it through and we do it. That's freeing you up to also take care of the other parts of that business, right? I've seen it happen time and time, walking on some of these properties where there's 10, 20 years of deferred maintenance and just everything has been neglected. You could tell that they're just flying by to the seat of their pants and just putting out each fire every day, but they're never getting ahead and they're never delivering, a really premium experience because they're trying to do everything. And so, the more that you can automate, the more that you can make passive, streamline, put systems in place, work with professionals to take some of those things off your plate, that frees you up to really focus on just being an operator, just being that personality, engaging with guests. If you're not running around putting out fires for everything, then you have the ability to sit down and spend that 5 minutes and do something fun and unique and personalized for your guests.
Yeah, that's totally key, right? Buying back your time is only useful if you refill it with other value add tasks.
It's the full circle execution of everything, right? I just posted on LinkedIn. I know you're a big reader, aren't you, Kevin?
I know how to read, yes.
Well, but you post about your books that you're reading on a regular basis, don't you? I see that on LinkedIn. That's why I'm calling you out for it. But like I posted on LinkedIn yesterday, I can't remember where I came up with this thought process. It was sometime late last night. But just like reading is only the first step. What do you actually do when you're done reading? And very few, like we always see and I'm not saying this is from you, Kevin, at all, but like generally speaking, just all over social media, you hear people say, I'm reading this book, I'm reading this, I've learned how to do this. But, okay, but what have you done after you're done reading the book? Do you just read the next book, or right?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but
like one of the things I've started doing, Brian, and probably can attribute this to you. I feel like if I don't do more with AI, then you'll cut me out of your life. But like as I'm reading or listening to a book, when I'm done, I'll go in and I'll ask ChatGPT to summarize that chapter or those pages. What are the key takeaways? What are the highlights? What are the quotes? And so you kind of create your own cliff notes as you're doing it, and then sharing that out with my team, putting that into like, the weekly or monthly or quarterly goals. If it's something that I feel like is going to be beneficial for our team that we need to do, using that, right? Not just reading it, hearing it, feeling good about it, but how do you take it and then push it forward and do something with it?
100%. All right. Well, we're running out of time here. You guys have any final thoughts? I hate to cut a conversation short, but I've got another podcast in an hour. Zach, any final thoughts?
I think the biggest takeaway that I got from this conversation is, I talk to 3 to 4 people a week about new properties, new projects, land they're considering buying, or we're going to buy this whole campground. And, we always get to that discussion point of what is this going to cost me? And I've always felt like our fees are very, very reasonable. I tell them usually you're going to pay less to work with us than it costs you to even build one glamping unit or renovate, 2 RV spaces. So I see value in it, but the thing that just really jumped out at me for this discussion was that both Garrett and Kevin have somebody that they worked with, and that they found value in that, and it saved them time, and in the long run, it saved them money. So it's nice to hear, especially the glamping industry in general. I think kind of started with a very kind of grassroots bootstrap. I'm going to go set this up in my backyard kind of operators, and as the industry's evolved and we've gotten a lot more sophisticated, and planning departments are waking up, like I don't always see that from operators in this space. So that was a big thing, big key takeaway for me that jumped out was, um, that both of you weighed in on that made a big difference in the stuff that you've done. And I tell everybody, like, you don't have to work with me, but please work with somebody.
Yeah.
Don't try to do it all on your own.
Kevin?
I only have so many good thoughts. I got to save them for the next time. I don't want to run out in February and not have anything valuable to say the rest of the year.
Kevin, you're buying a new park. Think of all the ideas that's going to come from that.
Oh, I've already got the ideas.
Where's it at?
Pennsylvania.
Nice.
So it'll be our second park in Pennsylvania. We close end of the month.
Nice.
All right, well, you can tell us all about it maybe next month once it's public and
I will.
private. So
I will.
thank you, Kevin, for being here as always. Garrett, final thoughts?
This is just, I agree with Zach, how he kind of framed it, that it's always refreshing to hear people with going into the mindset of, this type of industry, thinking about it in a much larger scale, and it really just adds value to everybody in this industry as we kind of lift the space up as a whole. And a lot of people don't know about these type of experiences that we're able to provide, and they're seeing people in the space that are doing it right and trying to really provide that ideal guest experience that they, even if it's not my glamp site that they rent another one and they have a great experience, they'll tell somebody else like, hey, glamping was awesome, or like, I think you should check it out. And that just lifts everybody up as a whole. And it's refreshing to hear. As you hear a lot of bad operators and in the short-term rental space in general. It's good to hear people that are really taking this serious and trying to provide an experience that people will hold with them for the rest of their lives.
100%. I'll have Shara reach out to you, Garrett, if you really want to come back in a month, and we'll talk about personalized guest experiences as part of the show next month. Is that okay with you, Kevin and Zach, if we bring him back? And
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us for another episode of MC Fireside Chats. We'll wrap it up. I know we're a couple minutes late here. I have another podcast coming up in about, less than an hour now, called Outwired. If anybody who's watching wants to join me, it's a little bit different than this one. It's with myself, Scott Barr, and Greg Emmert, and we just kind of talk about AI and tech and data. And I think we're going to talk today about the RV industry and whether that bubble might or might not have first. A little contrarian opinion there to get people to watch. A little bit about AI agents and some other fun things. So we'll see you guys later. And otherwise, we'll see you next week on another episode of MC Fireside Chats. Take care, guys. We'll see you.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.